So good morning, and to all who are attending the class. This class is going to be about the most fundamental topic and the most fundamental verses in the Torah. That is the first verse of the Torah, and to try to understand and have a discussion of the first verse of the Torah, Breishis. So the first verse of the Torah says, Breishis bara Elokim. And there's a generally accepted translation, or I should say, a first understanding translation of that verse and how we read it. So it says, the first translation we normally utilize for the first verse of the Torah is in the beginning, Hashem created. Now, this verse itself, and this verse itself is the subject to a massive controversy amongst traditional sages and other commentators as well, trying to understand what exactly is this verse teaching us. So Rashi, as the ultimate of all commentators, gives his first understanding, and the outset says that this is not to be understood, or perhaps better said, it cannot be understood in a simple sense, and the verse itself calls out for a interpretation. So, what is the problem that Rashi has, and many of our commentators trying to understand within this verse, and that is the grammatical aspect, which is within the words Breishis. So the word Breishis, and Rashi explains that to us. The word Breishis is in a specific violation, trying to it says itself in what's called a construct format. That is, that the construct format implies that it is subservient, or in Hebrew also called nismach, that this word in its conjugation is looks for another word, and its conjugation is not complete. That's one issue, and the second issue is that the next word, Breishis bara, that the word bara itself is in a different conjugation as well. Because according to its simple interpretation, the violation of the word bara should be different, as Rashi explains in his teachings. So, because of that, because the wording and the grammar of the words are different. So, in its most simplest sense, Rashi tells us that Rashi is forced to say that we can't translate the words in a simple sense to say that in the beginning Hashem created, which has got its implication, but rather we need to have a different interpretation. So therefore, we find that Translators don't translate it in a literal sense. Don't try to translate the thing in a don't translate it in the simple sense of saying at the beginning of time God created, but rather as the text, for instance, produced by Judaic Press and others, translated as in the beginnings of God's creation of the heavens and earth. And in that way, there is no implication in relationship to overarching the idea of time in general. So the word becomes so. Rashi tells us that we can't understand this, not to be interpreted as something about time or the creation of time, but it's telling us that when God created, he created the heavens and the earth first. So this is so therefore, and Rashi's interpretation says that really there's nothing to do, that these words don't have anything to do with or don't imply a creative the creation time sequence, and therefore Rashi says we need to have a second interpretation. We have to go to the Medrash, and where the Medrash gives us an interpretation that he writes that the world was created for Breishis, that this verse is now coming to tell us the motivation of Hashem's creation. The motivation of Hashem's creation is to look at the word Breishis, is taught to us by looking at the word Breishis. It's spelled, which the Torah starts with a base, and it's written Breishis. We take off the first letter, and we understand it to say the motivation of the creation of the world is for the two things which are called Breishis. So we read the verse, and the verse is telling us, according to Rashi's interpretation, which is saying now, this is the most simplest interpretation, for the two items which are considered Breishis, the base things which are created, which are called Breishis, that is the motivation for Elohim, for God to borrow, to create the world. What are those two Breishis? The two things which are called Breishis is Israel, the nation Israel, and the Torah. Okay, so with that as the first understanding, that the word Breishis, the sentence Breishis, is not teaching us a time sequence, but is really, or it doesn't have what to teach and tell us about the time sequence of creation, but it's really just telling us that Breishis is the motivation. Breishis is the motivation of the world. So I'm going to read the first few lines of the Rashi that we have just learned, and see how we see it, how we understand it within the text. Of course, I'll translate it in English, right? And it's the Rashi says this is the second Rashi of the beginning of the Chumash. Breishis bara, and the Hebrew of Breishis bara means, and Rashi immediately, without any other description, says, Ein mikra zeh ema ela darsheni. This verse immediately calls out for midrashic interpretation, because according to the simple interpretation, the violation of the word bora should be different, as Rashi will explain, as mentioned in a moment. It should be bara, as he will say, as he says down in the text. So it teaches us that the sequence of the creation, Bishvil that the sequence of the creation is written is impossible, as it's written immediately below, and as our rabbis stated, that God created the world for the sake of the Torah, which is called Breishis, and the sake of Israel, who is called the first of his grain, which is Breishis. And then Rashi goes on and defends his statement by teaching us that if it were to explain it according to that simple meaning, that it means at the beginning of time, then it would be spelled differently. So according to that line, we would then understand that the first verse of the Torah is not teaching us a time sequence, but really teaching us an introduction of as that the creation of the heavens and the earth, the motivation of the creation of the heaven and the earth was in order that there was for the purposes of the two things which are termed Breishis, the two beginnings, two firsts, which is the Torah and Israel, and then we come to the second verse, and the second verse then tells us after the creation has started, what did Hashem find? Hashem found that the world was in a state of what's called, as the verse says in the second verse, Tohu Ubohu, and that this astonishment, this state of being in Tohu Ubohu is how Hashem reset and continued, and then continued to improve on the world. He then created light and put light into the world. So that is how Rashi wants us to read it. So Rashi further sort of tells us, well, it couldn't have been that the world was created, that heaven and earth was created first, because the heavens has a dependency on water, as he elaborates, because the heavens are made out of water, and water hadn't been created yet. So that's part of his proof context to say that the words of the first verse in the Torah can't be taken as a time sequence, because that time sequence doesn't correlate with verses further that we have. So that's the first thing, how we've understood it. Continuing on, so we are left with understanding that that Rashi's simple understanding of the first two verses of the Torah are that the first verse the first verse has become a secondary concept. This first verse is a secondary concept to the second verse, because it's just setting up the stage for us to understand the second verse, and then consequences, and then the further continuation of the understanding of the way the world was created. But with that being said, nevertheless, we have it seems that somewhat, of course, that's got difficulty in understanding, because it seems that the first verse now has taken on a secondary aspect, and that bothers us, right? So therefore, Rashi gives us other interpretations, and not all the commentators have the same idea. Ibn Ezra, another major commentator, doesn't agree and says no, that even though there is grammatical inconsistencies there, that's the verses can be said that way, and that Breishis bara Elokim is actually telling us a time sequence that the first thing that God created was the heavens and earth. Now, going further, I want to say that this is not the only, of course, other sages have got their own commentary in relationship to this. In Chassidus and Kabalah, they have Chassidus and Kabalah have the same questions to ask. How do we understand the first verse, and is the first verse really just an introduction to the second verse? That doesn't seem as logical as it should be. It should be that, and as many interpretations go, that have taught us that this is, that the first verse is a primary verse. So how could it be that this verse is teaching us, and it's really just a secondary to the second verse? So as we have learned Tanya ourselves, and we've heard of the different we've learned about the different spiritual realms in Kabbalah and in Chassidus. The first two sentences are now are taught in a different sense. When it says Breishis bara Elokim, when it says that Hashem created the world, we're very specific. We say that the Torah is obviously very specific, and when it uses the name Shem Elokim, it means that the name of the Lord, the name of Elokim, is the one which created, as we've learned in other places. That the name of the Lord Elokim is chose on some sort of creative and constraining capabilities of Hashem. So therefore, Chassidus understands the first verse as teaching that Breishis bara Elokim, that the first things which were created, but not in time, but not necessarily in time, but the first things that Elokim, the constraining capabilities of the Shemus, that like we learned in the Tanya in Sharichot B'Yamuna in chapter 5, and we had that very long discussion about the names of Hashem, and that the name of Hashem, which is spelled with the Yud Vov Hey, is relationship to Sovev, encompassing light, while the Elokim has got to do with the immanent and constraining capabilities of Hashem. So in here we learn Breishis bara Elokim, that at the outset Elokim created the heavens and the earth. What are in our context, we understand the heavens and the earth to be a relativistic concept. Whatever is higher is called Shamayim, the heavens. Whatever is lower in spirituality is called the earth. And that we learn that Hashem created, Elohim created Esa Shamayim, all the heavenly aspects, or all the higher aspects that is being created from via Elohim, and the lower aspects also Horetz. So this is a relativistic idea. And Chassidus continues to say that the 10 spheres itself were creations. So the Breishis per Elohim teaches us that the world of Atzilus was created, and the specific spheres of the world of Atzilus were also created. They are they're created entities, and all four are all standing as tools in the hands of Hashem to be able to create the ongoing creations and the creation of the world. And then the next verse is about that Hashem found the earth to be Tohu Bohu. That is a teaching to us that first came after Atzilus was created, and the 10 spheres of Atzilus, including the highest spiritual levels of Hashem, Chochmat Atzilus, that is a creation yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, a creation ex nihilo, and that all of this, in a sense of relativism, even though in other places we understand that the world of Atzilus is an emanation from godliness in itself, so it's not a created being, but relative to the highest levels of Hashem, Atzmas Mahus, the essence of Hashem, we can consider it a level of yesh me'ayin, a level of creation from nothing, a creation ex nihilo. And then, as the next stage in the Seder Ishtalshalis, in the creation of the worlds, there is, as discussed in Chassidus Kabalah, the idea of the breaking of the vessels, and that is the idea of Tohu Bohu, which is called second verse, which is called Tohu Bohu, the world found in a state of chaos. That is the realm of Tohu. Then Hashem created light. Hashem took the divine light, and he then perfected the world by shining the light into the vessels of the three worlds below it, into Biyah, into Breishis, which we've heard of those terms in our learnings of Tanya, that Hashem put and fashioned and made the world of Tikkun by making the worlds of Breishis and put God's light into them until the format of creating man, for which man is the ultimate purpose of creation. So the 6 days of creation refer to bringing out the light of which was shown when Hashem said, "Let there be light." Those lights would then shine into the vessels, thereby creating all the specific creations on the levels, on the spiritual levels below that. So this ties in the ideas of the first two verses, teaching us that Hashem, when he created the world, utilized the spiritual capabilities of Atzilus and Bia, and teach us that the lights of Hashem were shined into the world, fixing the world for its ultimate purpose. That is for the as the Midrashic explanation is, for the purposes of learning Torah and creating of the world. So this whole topic is something which needs a lot of investigation and a lot of learnings. Something that I want to emphasize is this is that the Torah has many faces. The Torah's expression is there's many faces to the Torah, meaning many different explanations within the realm, and as we say, there is the realms of Torah teachings and explanation go into the Torah can be understood in a simple sense, but also understood in a mystical sense, and the simple interpretation, as Rashi explained to us, is very difficult to read into the words, and therefore we have to use a midrashic explanation. And then he goes, and then in his understanding, therefore the first verse just acts as a precursor to the second verse, that the world was created with the motivation of Breishis, of the two Breishis, and that's why heaven and earth was created. And then Hashem, after creating the beginnings of the creation, found the world in astonishment and brought the light of Torah in the world. That's a simple understanding of the first verses, the way Rashi teaches us. The way Kabalah teaches the first two interpretations is that it fits into the idea of the creation of the multiple worlds, Seder Shtalshles, and that the first thing that God created or brought into place is the 10 spheres, which then act as the tools and creative capabilities in order to create the rest of the heavens of earth in a relative sense, the three worlds underneath it, the worlds of Bia, until the ultimate culmination, as the Medrash explains, for the purposes of creating man, and that man should be able to understand God's wisdom, and create a better world, and ultimately bring the world to the state of Mashiach. Okay, so this is a general. This was a general wrapping up or interpretation of the first two worlds. It's of the first two verses. If you look in and investigate this in other Jewish sources, you'll see that this is an endless topic to understand, but this is just a first brief and a first introduction to it. Okay, I hope that this class has been illuminating, and we'll meet again when we continue our learnings. So I just want to read something from my brother-in-law's Olav Shalom Rabbi Steinsaltz's interpretation on the Chumash, and give us a little bit of just another level of insight into the first verses, and just a point to ponder, because there are many philosophers who try to understand the idea of creation, yesh ma'ayin, creation ex nihilo, from the beginning verses. But one way, and this fits in somewhat into how we were just learning from Chassidus how to understand it. And he writes like the opening verse, the singular opening verse of Breishis, in the beginning, Hashem created, that the opening verse takes the existence of God as a given. There's no discussion about the creation of Hashem, which is one of the aspects of philosophy. I said, how do we get an introduction into Hashem Himself? But the opening verse takes the existence of Hashem as a given. Therefore, it doesn't address questions about God's origin or his nature. Rather, God is to be understood as to be the absolute existence from where everything begins. And then the first verses then teach us that already at the beginning of the account of creation, heaven and earth, spiritual and physical, or a higher level and a lower level, but heaven and earth appear as distinct entities, and they become the framework for all creation as detailed in the rest of the first chapter. And so therefore, Kabbalah and Chassidus take this on as a given, and that even further, but detailing it a little bit more, the first two verses establish some of the ideas that are basic to Kabbalah and Chassidus. That is the creation of the spiritual realm of the world of Atzilus, the first of the first four worlds, the creation of the different elements, and in Kabbalah it breaks up the first passage of Breishis Bara Elokim as referring to specifically that Bara refers to Chochmah of Atzilus, Elokim refers to Bina of Atzilus, and that's Shemayim refers to the six midas, the six emotional attributes, and Horus refers to Malchus. And Kabbalah breaks it up a little bit further and saying where Breishis refers to the base of the Breishis refers to Keser, and then breaks it up somewhat similar to how Chassidus breaks it up. And then in the second verse then talks about how the earth was unformed and empty, tohu bohu, and that the earth was completely lacking any structure and order, and that's as explained in the deepest mystical ideas, that they were unformed and empty, meaning to say that there wasn't a cooperative entity as per Chassidus, or in the simple understanding, it was Rashi's understanding, it would be unformed and empty, but the verse continues that it's the Torah and the Vohu is very difficult to understand, and therefore it lends itself to the understanding of the creation of the spiritual worlds. Okay, so there is so much more to understand in all of this, but I just hope that this is a start-off point and a beginning point to further investigate, further investigation of it.